On. Oh, I think we are now on. Well, hello, good evening. This is Mr. Ippolito, and I have here with me
Mr. Edwards here.
Right on. Right on. Hello, Mr. Edwards. So we finally figured it out.
Mr. Ippolito,
we were able to. Oh, I should mute myself there. We're able to get Mr. Edwards connected, and so here we go. We're rocking and rolling. And for those of you just joining us, good evening and welcome to our 2018 Quarter 2 Mr. Ippolito and Mr. Edwards Quarter 2 history, 8th grade history review study session. We want to welcome all 11 of you who are currently watching live and give a quick shout out to Isak, John, Connor, Sasha, I think that's Brianna. And then we've got Nick, Frembo. I'm not sure who Frembo is. Hello, Naomi. And yep, there's Bree again. Hello, Bree, Sean Thomas, Jahoon, and Annika. So welcome to those of you. We got 16 people watching now. Right on. Okay, so I think we'll go ahead, Mr. Edwards. I see a couple of things that are popping up. Of course, the way this works best is if you go into the chat and you ask your question right there in the chat. That's obviously the easiest way. We're going to deal tonight with the questions that are most on your mind so we can help you get prepared for this exam. If for whatever reason the chat's not working or if you're not able to access it, let's say you're on a mobile device, then you can always, I've got my email alerts that are popping up. So if you want to email your question to me, that would be like the second best way to submit your question. Or if you just feel like, I don't know, for whatever reason, your question is not coming through on the chat or chat, whatever, if chat's not working for you, and you want to get through, you could also email as well. So, Mr. Edwards, I see here, I think the first thing that came up was, what is a portal? And the portal question was one of those questions. It was a vocabulary from The Legend of Sleepy Hollow. I think I threw in maybe 3 or 4 vocab terms from The Legend of Sleepy Hollow. So a portal is simply, as Naomi mentioned, a door. Nick, I'm not quite sure if it's a magical door that teleports you somewhere, although it could be. But in this case, I think the idea of a portal was just as an entryway. A large enough window can be a portal. A door can be a portal. Anything that takes you from one place into another place is a portal. So that's what that is there. Okay. So hopefully that answered your question, Frembo. Mr. Edwards, what's the next question? There's a lot of stuff coming through on the chat right now. What do you see as the next one?
Our next one is the test multiple choice, which it mostly will be.
Mostly, yes, and emphasis on mostly. Mr. Edwards and I are still in discussions as to whether or not it'll be entirely multiple choice, or if we're going to add maybe 1 or 2 short written response questions. That's always a possibility, so just be prepared for that. But Connor, to answer your question, mostly multiple choice, and right now we're looking at about 50 multiple choice questions. And then the way that I want to format it is tomorrow I'm going to give you approximately, I would say maybe another 10 minutes or so at the beginning of class, just to kind of collect your thoughts, get everything together, just make sure that you're mentally prepared. You can kind of take a look over your notes one last time, 10, 12 minutes or so at the beginning of the period, and then we'll go ahead and we'll jump right into our exam, if that's what you're wondering, like what is tomorrow going to look like. All right, Mr. Edwards, what's next?
Let's see, we have, what are all 10 ways to flex your rights?
Oh, wow. Okay, so rather than just going through all of those ways to flex your rights, one of the places I would direct you to, there's so many good resources on MrIppolito.com, and we simply just don't, we don't have time to go over every single thing. But one of the things I can direct you to is the table of contents. And on the table of contents, I'm fairly sure that item number 12, no, wait, that's Bill of Rights, you be the judge. Oh, there we go. 10 rules for police encounters. It's item number 14, and I'm clicking on that link there. And item number 14 has all 10 of those. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to drop these into the chat. And that way you see them. So Nick, I'm dropping this in for you. That link is for you. But again, if you're looking for resources, places to study, that table of contents, we really do a good job, Mr. Edwards and I. We've worked hard to try to put all of the resources, all the handouts, everything, the slideshows and the gallery walk things, everything up that, that we put, all the resources that we provide should be there. So Nick, I'm not going to go through all 10. I will tell you that the ones that I like the most, I like the, you have the right to remain silent. I do not consent to searches. I like the part about not letting them in, that last scenario that we saw when we watched the Flex Your Rights video about enforcing your Fourth Amendment rights against unlawful searches and seizures. Most of the time, when the only way to protect your Fourth Amendment rights is to know them and to stand up for them. So I'll go ahead and I'll leave it at that. And if you want to check them out more, you want to watch that video all over again, then it's available right there in item number 14 on the agenda on MrIppolito.com. All right, Mr. Edwards, what's going on next?
Yeah, what is the necessary and proper clause?
Oh, necessary. Mr. Edwards, I feel like I'm stealing all of, taking all the really good questions here. Do you want to take necessary and proper clause?
All right. Necessary and proper clause is from the section on the legislative branch. So Article 1, I believe, Section 9. All right.
Article 1, Section 8.
Oh, yeah, sorry, Section 8. So it's the very last power granted to the legislature, and it basically says that they have the right to make laws that are necessary and proper to carry out the other powers that are granted to Congress. So, for example, the power to declare war or the power to collect taxes, they have to pass a law to make that happen. And this necessary and proper clause is what gives them the authority to do that.
And I'll just add on that the necessary and proper clause, and I'm writing this down just to make sure that, because this is a really good one, the necessary and proper clause, that it's also known as the elastic clause. It's this idea that especially those people who would want to interpret the Constitution loosely try to give the federal government as much power as possible. And again, you'll remember which side, which political party wanted to give the most power to the federal government. Of course, that's going to be the Federalist Party, right? The Hamiltonians, they're the ones, Alexander Hamilton, he's the one who wanted to interpret the Constitution broadly, really stretch the powers of the federal government. And so he's going to say, you know what? Even though it does not say in the Constitution to create a national bank, a national bank is necessary and proper to the running of a new nation, and therefore we need a national bank. The national bank was argued over, the constitutionality was argued for decades, even after Hamilton's death. Is this necessary and proper? We have even modern debates over what is necessary and proper. Is healthcare necessary and proper? Is it necessary and proper for the federal government to be involved in the administration of healthcare or health insurance? So we have these debates even today. What is the role of the federal government? How far should it step in trying to help the citizens and improve our lives? Or is it just an intrusion and an overstepping of power? So we still have that argument today over what is necessary and proper and how far we should stretch that necessary and proper clause. All right.
And that also answers a couple questions about strict versus loose interpretation. So thank you, Mr. Ippolito.
Yes.
We have Brandon Sanchez. What specifically should we review? Is reviewing the Quizlet and Study Guide enough?
Well, Mr. Edwards, you've actually been more involved in the writing of these questions than I have. So what would you say to that?
I would recommend at least reviewing your notes. So the notes and handouts that we have either not collected or the ones we have returned to you. There's some important stuff in that. I want to look through the Federalist Papers, make sure I'm familiar with the Federalist Papers. I'd want to double check that powers of government handout, things like that.
And then and then I would also just add on to that, we don't really do a whole lot of textbook reading. That's really not, a lot of the resources that we give you are outside resources. So, I'm looking through the table of contents here. the 3-2 reading, 3-3 reading. So it's 2 sections in the textbook that I actually assigned. Did we give a reading quiz on anything else, Mr. Edwards? It's not here in the table of contents.
I don't believe so. I think it, well,
was it 4-1?
4-1.
Did we do 4-1?
Yes.
I just didn't include it in the table of contents. So you know what, Brianna, it might be worth also going over chapter 3, section 2, chapter 3, section 3, and chapter 4, section 1. Also in the textbook, a good resource is the Constitution. There are notes. There are notations in the margins on either side to help explain the Constitution, or if you want to do a little bit of brush up on the Constitution digital interactive notebook is a great way to review for that as well. So all of the above, Brianna, certainly Quizlet and notes are a good start, but if you want to have a more just a better review of everything, those are some good places to go. All right, Mr. Edwards, what's up next?
All right, we have a brief question about whether there will be extra credit on the test, which I don't believe we are going to be including.
No extra credit. However, if you would like to improve your grade, one of the ways that you can do that is, as I've been mentioning, I mentioned it last quarter, I'll mention it again this quarter. For those of you who have been keeping your notes, you have a stack of notes now, and if you look at that table of contents, your reading notes, Washington Irving, your midterm research, midterm election tracker, you take a look at almost all of those assignments, with the exception of the ones that are in Google Classroom. Those are all digital assignments. But all of those papers, all the notes, the reading notes, textbook notes, everything that you've basically written down over the course of the quarter, you turn those in, done, or almost all the way done, you're going to get a 25 out of 25, which is 100%. If the multiple choices were 50 points and the notes by themselves are worth 25 points, you think about that, that's 100% on a 25-point assignment. It's easy points if you've just been keeping track of your notes. So while we don't plan to have any extra credit, turning those notes in can be a big help. And if you're like, oh, I didn't do those, well, then make a plan for next quarter, starting in 2019, make it your New Year's resolution to start taking and keeping those notes in one place so you can turn them in at the end of quarter 3. All right, what's next?
All right, here's the question from Naomi Jung. Are there going to be a lot of questions about the midterm elections? There, answer that one. There will be a few questions about the midterm elections. So not like 10 or 20, okay? I would want to be familiar with the races that we were following, the 3 that you voted on in particular. I'd be familiar with the ideas around what is a ballot initiative? Why do we have ballot initiatives? What are they all about? And just kind of what were the results of the election in general, and what does that mean for the next couple of years?
All really good advice. Mr. Edwards wrote some great questions on our election materials, so I'm excited for you to check those out. So, Mr. Edwards, since you've been responding, I went ahead and I did notice that Ian asked what a portal is. Ian, just check back. We already answered that question earlier in the study session, so you can just you can rewind when it's all done. Jahoon asked what is necessary, proper, and clause. Sean Thomas asks, what are the 4 pillars? Is it executive, judicial, legislature, and media? And oh, that's lovely. It's not. What was that? Yes.
I did drop the Hamilton's 4 pillars into the chat below.
Oh, look at you. Right on. Yeah, so those would be the 4 pillars. Mr. Edwards, did you drop that in from the gallery walk? Is that what you dropped in? Perfect.
The overall. So we can talk more about them if people have questions.
Yeah, so basically the 4 pillars, it's Alexander Hamilton's financial plan. So among them, not going to go into a lot of detail, but among them would be the national bank, formation of a national bank, assuming state debts, creation of a national debt, and why is the 4th one? Why am I drawing a blank? What was that?
Customs and excise tax.
Oh, yeah. Customs and excise taxes. And then I think included in that, and maybe it didn't appear in the gallery walk, but tariff. So an import tariff as well. Oh, that's a customs tax. I'm sorry. Customs tax is the same as an import tariff. It's just whenever you put a tax on stuff coming into the United States. And then excise taxes are any taxes on manufactured goods, including whiskey. And so that's going to inspire the Whiskey Rebellion. So there you go. All right, what's next, Mr. Edwards?
I have what is a bicameral legislature from Ian, which Sasha answered is a two-part Congress, and that is a good answer.
Yes, a good answer, and also good to know for the exam, Mr. Edwards. I feel like there was some mention of bicameral legislature on on one of the exam questions. I think, right?
Yes, that would definitely be a good thing to know. It might also be a good idea to know which plans from the Constitutional Convention had a bicameral or a unicameral, which is one house, legislature.
Yes, really good to know the New Jersey plan, the Virginia plan, the Connecticut Compromise, also known as the Great Compromise. That all connects with that idea of either bicameral legislature or unicameral legislature. So very good, very good. Okay, let's see here. Oh, right on. Okay, what was the next thing, Mr. Edwards? I'm trying to scroll back here.
Next one I have is, will there be quotes from Thomas Jefferson?
Ooh, quotes from Thomas Jefferson. Hey, so Mr. Edwards, I'm wondering, have you included, I have not, we're totally just talking about test content right now, and those of you who are watching this get to be in on our conversation. I haven't looked through the entire test yet. Did you include Hamilton Jefferson quotes?
So far, I have not.
Ooh, all right. Well, I know we still have some room because I think we have 45 questions total. Is that correct?
That's the current plan.
Okay, so my plan, plans can always change, but my plan right now is to throw in at least a couple of quotes from Hamilton and Jefferson. Now, here's what this means. Here's what it doesn't mean. It does not mean go and try to scour the internet for every Hamilton and Jefferson quote you can find. That's ridiculous. Here's what it should mean to you. If you know the difference between Hamilton and Jefferson, if you know what each of these guys stood for, and this is going to be important, then that will help you to determine if we throw one or two or three quotes out there from either Hamilton or Jefferson, and we just ask who said this, Hamilton or Jefferson, then you should be able to determine based on what you know about Hamilton being a loose constructionist, Jefferson being a strict constructionist, Hamilton being pro strong central government, Jefferson being pro states' rights, those kinds of things. So I think that will help you. And I think that will also help because, Mr. Edwards, we do have a section on Federalists and Anti-Federalists, correct?
I believe so.
Okay, good.
We
deals.
definitely talk about it a little bit. So
yeah. Okay, so yes. So the answer is yes. You should know the difference between Hamilton and Jefferson.
All right. So we had a follow up to the four pillars, which we talked about, Sean. Sasha's asking how many written there are going to be. John answers one or two, which sounds appropriate. If we
that's reasonable, yes, that is an accurate answer, and it could be 0, 1, or 2. Yes.
All right. Connor was requesting if we could post the answers of the study guide so that they can ensure their answers are correct compared to ours.
Oh, well, the best way to know the answers to the study guide is to look them up. I'm not going to give an answer key to the study guide, but I don't know, am I being mean by not doing that? Do other teachers post answer keys to study guides? I don't know. If they do, let me know and I'll reconsider. But for this one, I'm not.
All right. Not seeing a barrage of people on the chat saying, yes, you're mean. So now it's coming in.
Okay.
So apparently a lot of them do, in fact, post answers.
Oh, all right. Well, so I'll be mean. I think Justin asks, which proposition should we focus on the most? What do you think, Mr. Edwards? Which propositions?
Overall, I would be more concerned with the idea behind propositions.
Okay, rather than focusing
don't worry
on
about any specifics.
Yeah, so in other words, you don't have to memorize the fact that I don't even remember the numbers exactly, daylight savings time. You don't need to remember all of that. Just remember the theory. Why do we have propositions? They're also called ballot measures or ballot initiatives. If you know the why, then I think you're in good shape on that.
All right. So we have, what are some shared powers?
Ooh, okay. So I love talking about this. So it's the difference between national powers, state powers, and shared powers. And I think this was in the Constitution digital interactive notebook, I think. And if it's not, then correct me and let me know where it is. But it's this idea, it's like a Venn diagram. And I'm going to draw a Venn diagram, and I will show it here. So the Venn diagram is the two circles that overlap, and there it is right there. You see national, shared, and state. So, for example, a national power, an example of a national power would be the military, the armed forces. You cannot, the states cannot have an armed forces. The national government would have the power to negotiate treaties with other countries. California cannot do that. Massachusetts cannot do that. State powers. State has the power to set voting laws, do driver's licenses, oversee education. Those are examples of state powers. Those shared powers are the ones that are in the middle, that both national and state both share together. So they could both do them. For example, the power to tax. That is the best example of a shared power. Another shared power would be the power of law enforcement, the power to fight crime, right? Because on the state level, you have state and local level, you have police and sheriffs and highway patrol. On the national level, you have the FBI, you have the U.S. Marshals Service. So those are the big shared powers. It's things that both the national, state, and national governments can both do. What else am I missing, Mr. Edwards, on shared powers?
That felt pretty thorough to me.
Okay.
So shared powers are sometimes called concurrent powers. I don't think that'll be particularly important on the exam, but if I forgot and included that word, concurrent and shared would be similar.
Yeah, same thing. By the way, I'm noticing that some students are asking, can you help me with number 1? Can you help me on number 5? I don't have the study guide in front of me, so if you can ask specific questions, then that would be helpful. I see that Nick Lindell says, oh, yeah, go ahead.
We did just answer number 5, which included shared powers.
Oh, perfect. Okay. Good deal. And then Nick Lindell says, I see it right in front of me, will we need to know all 27 amendments or just the Bill of Rights? Here's what I will tell you. And like I said, Mr. Edwards wrote most of these questions. I'm going to write a couple more, and I haven't looked over all of them, but this is what I think is important. First Amendment, the 5 freedoms of the First Amendment, right? Freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of the press, the right to petition, and the right to assemble peaceably, right? So those are the 5 freedoms of the First Amendment. Second Amendment, I think, is important. That's the right to keep and bear arms. Third Amendment, kind of important. It's the Quartering Act. Mr. Edwards, did you throw anything in there on quartering of troops?
Currently, no.
Okay. Notice he says currently no. We might throw that in there. Right now, it's not in there. Fourth Amendment, that is unlawful search and seizure. We really hammered this hard. The Fourth Amendment. Fifth, Sixth, and Eighth Amendments are all the rights of the accused. So Fifth Amendment would be no, you don't have to testify against yourself. So I plead the Fifth. I don't have to answer questions if I don't want to that would incriminate myself. The Fifth Amendment is also the protection against double jeopardy. In other words, you've been tried and convicted of a crime. You cannot be, you've been tried and found not guilty of a crime. Then you can't be tried again. If new evidence comes to light, you cannot be tried again for that same crime twice. Sixth Amendment, it's the right to an attorney. It's the right to a speedy and public trial. So what happens sometimes still in other countries is they will have private secret trials where the public can't access it, the media, your family, your friends. Here in the United States, you are guaranteed, if you're accused of a crime, the right to a speedy and public trial. The only time we ever have private trials would be like family court, where there's a minor testifying, something like that. But otherwise, everything, all criminal trials are public trials that are open so that everyone can see that there's that transparency. That's the Sixth Amendment. Eighth Amendment is the protection against cruel and unusual punishment or excessive bail. So if you shoplift a pack of Starburst from Ralph's, you can't have $1 million bail that is set for your release while you're awaiting trial. And then no cruel or unusual punishment. That and we're having a debate right now over whether or not that would include the death penalty or what forms of the death penalty. For example, we used to do death penalty by hanging. We don't do that anymore. That was considered cruel and unusual. We used to do firing squad as a form of death penalty, and we don't do that anymore. There are even certain death penalty drugs, because right now the only form, electric chair, also considered cruel and unusual punishment. So right now the only way we do the death penalty currently in the United States is through lethal injection. You basically inject a sedative followed by poison into the body of the person who is receiving the death penalty. And even now, that is being argued could be a form of cruel and unusual punishment if it's not administered properly, if the poison acts faster than the sedative, anyway, I don't need to go into those details, but that's the Eighth Amendment. So 1, 2, a little bit of 3, 4, 5, 6, 8 in the Bill of Rights. I think those are the most important. The other things that I would add would be those amendments that deal with voting rights. So those would include the 15th Amendment, which gave newly freed African Americans after the Civil War the right to vote. African American males, I should say, women did not yet have the right to vote. That was in the 1860s. In 1920, the 19th Amendment gave women the right to vote. I'm hoping I'm going to get this right. The 24th Amendment, which was the poll tax, and that was in the 1960s, 1964 maybe, that got rid of the poll tax. So you no longer had to pay a tax at the polls in order to vote. That was aimed primarily at African Americans to prevent them from voting, and that we got rid of that, and with the 24th Amendment. And then finally, the last one is the 26th Amendment. That was in 1971 that lowered the voting age down to 18. So out of all the amendments, those are the ones that I like the most. Mr. Edwards, did I miss anything?
No, I did just drop all those into the chat. So
wonderful.
Those of you who need a quick reference, it's available to you at the bottom of the chat right now. All right, let's see. So that answers the next several. All right, Ian asks, what do we need to know about a ballot measure?
Oh, and again, so Ian, I think Ian, you might be just on a little bit of a delay. We did mention earlier in the live chat that you really just need to know what a ballot measure is. You know that it's the same as a ballot initiative. It's the same as a proposition. So a ballot measure, just to be clear, just so everybody understands, that's when people of a state, we can't do this on the federal level, not yet anyway, people of a state get to vote directly on laws for their state. So for example, one of the ballot measures that we had in our most recent ballot dealt with getting rid of daylight saving time. So rather than having to go through the state legislature and having the California State Assembly and the state Senate pass a bill, get it signed by the governor, we, the citizens of California, we can just pass the law directly. Now, maybe the daylight saving time proposition isn't the best example, because that does need to go through a couple more steps before it can finally be a thing. But you get the idea. So the idea is that we can pass laws directly in a state that affect the people of that state, and that's a proposition. So in that way, we have direct democracy in California because we can vote directly on laws. We still do not have direct democracy in the United States. Still, if we want laws passed in the United States, we have our elected representatives, our members of the House of Representatives and the Senate. They vote on laws, they send it to the president signs the bill into law, and so that's how that works. So, okay, I think we have thoroughly covered ballot measures, initiatives, propositions. It's all the same thing.
All right, so the next question is, do we need to know about the Supreme Court situations from that packet?
Well, I like them. Mr. Edwards, have you yet included anything from the packet, the You Be the Judge packet?
I have not. That would be in the Bill of Rights section that I was asking you about. So
Got it.
So they could show up.
Yeah. And I think, because I made the Quizlet and I put the cases that I thought were the most important. So the cases that I love the most, you can look at the Quizlet, but the cases that I love the most, the Bong Hits for Jesus case, that's the Frederick v. Morse case. I love that one. the Tinker v. Des Moines case. That was the one with the students in the armbands protesting against the Vietnam War. I love those freedom of speech cases. I love the Schenck case, just because I think it's so important in our history. That's another free speech case. That was the whole thing that dealt with. I was absent for that. I was at a conference. I think you were working on this with Mr. Edwards, and oh, pardon me, good grief. And it was all about the analogy of yelling fire in a crowded theater. It was the guy, Schenck, and I forget his first name. He was handing out flyers during World War I to teach people how to basically get out of the military draft. And he felt that it was his right to protest, his right to free speech, his right to peaceably assemble on a street corner with other people and hand out these flyers. The United States government disagreed and took him to court, arrested him. He took the case all the way eventually to the Supreme Court, where the Supreme Court ruled that handing out flyers to show people how to dodge the draft is essentially endangering the lives of the soldiers that are already overseas fighting for the United States. So in that particular case, that kind of speech was not protected. And I believe it was Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes who said that there are certain kinds of speech that are like yelling fire in a crowded theater. That kind of speech endangers the lives or the safety of others, and therefore it is not protected speech. So that's the Schenck case. Tinker, Frederick v. Morse. What's the other one that I like? Oh, the other two that I like. The Miranda case, Miranda v. Arizona. You went over that when I was gone, right, Mr. Edwards? You
Yes.
went over all these cases, yeah? Yeah, so the Miranda case.
I think we got through Kylo.
Oh, okay. And Kylo is the last one that I think you should really know about. So Kylo was a Fourth Amendment case, right? If you remember this, or if you just look back through the packet, and if you don't have the packet with you, you can check it out online. I believe the packet is item number... it's item number 12 on the table of contents on MrIppolito.com. So the Kylo case was where the guy, Danny Lee Kylo, he had in his home in Oregon, he had a massive marijuana grow inside his home. And the police, they had a thermal imaging device, and they were able to use this thermal imaging device to scan into his home and see that he had special grow lights. It was warmer in his house compared to other houses, and the police were like, yeah, this is suspicious. And so they were able to get the search warrant based on the thermal image of his house. That's how they arranged to get the search warrant from the judge. Well, when it went to court, Danny Lee Kylo's attorney said that basically that thermal imaging device constitutes an unlawful search. You couldn't normally be walking down the street and look into someone's home. People don't naturally have thermal imaging as part of their like regular five senses. And so basically the Supreme Court ruled that they ruled in Danny Lee Kylo's favor. They overturned his conviction on the marijuana possession and the growing. He had a ton of marijuana. Mr. Edwards, did you ever end up sharing that email that I got from Danny Lee Kylo?
I did.
Oh, nice. Classes, so. Okay, so if you recall, I actually, back when I was teaching high school seniors, they asked, well, what happened to all the marijuana that the police confiscated? And I'm like, I don't know, but we can find out. So I tracked down Danny Lee Kylo's email address. I emailed him, and you heard the response. Mr. Edwards shared it with you in class. He basically didn't get his marijuana back, but at least he had the conviction overturned because the Supreme Court did say that the police had violated his Fourth Amendment rights against unlawful search and seizure. Okay, whew. So those are all the cases. Long story short, those are all the cases that I think you need to know for the You Be the Judge packet of Supreme Court cases.
All right. There's a question about, and an extended discussion about whether there will be any civics test questions. The answer to that is no. We covered that on Monday.
we've already nailed down those civics exam questions. However,
no double jeopardy.
Yeah, absolutely. But what I can tell you, if it provides you with some hope for those of you who got a civics exam score that you were unhappy with, as I've mentioned, you can take the test again. You can take it up to once per day. Now, I had 0 students come to me to retake it today, but I will tell you this: if you would like to do the retake tomorrow after you're done with your regular exam, Or if you want to do the retake, if you think you have enough time to do it at brunch, there's no homeroom tomorrow. Or you can do it at lunch. Lunch will be plenty of time. Then you can do that. You just have to do it in one continuous sitting, and it's going to be all 100 questions. So you can't just like start taking it, walk away, and come back. It has to be in one continuous sitting. So if you can do it at brunch or after you're done with the exam tomorrow, your other exam, you can do the retake. It's your choice, but it would be on you to get that done. So yeah, so no civics exam. Although, I mean, it's, some of it's connected, right? Some of it's related. We're learning about the Bill of Rights, some of the Bill of Rights, Constitution, like some of that stuff. It's just kind of naturally overlapping, but there will not be any direct material from the civics exam on tomorrow's exam.
All right. We have why do we have propositions? I believe we covered that earlier.
I think so, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Let's see. Can we briefly explain Article 4 of the Constitution?
Oh, yeah, sure. Article 4. I want to say that, is that the one that deals with ratification? You can see how, it's
rights of
okay.
Citizens.
Yeah. The United States shall guarantee to every state in the Union a republican form of government. That's basically a republic. And shall protect each of them against invasion. Yes. Okay, so you can tell, if I needed to look it up because I forgot exactly what the content of Article 4 was, you can tell how important it is. I definitely think that you should know Articles 1, 2, and 3. I think you should know the Bill of Rights. I think you should know the preamble. Although, do we have any preamble questions, Mr. Edwards?
Not now.
No.
So probably not.
Yeah, we kind of moved beyond that, beyond the preamble. But yeah, I think you should know Articles 1, 2, and 3, the Bill of Rights, and then the voting amendments. I think those are important. Yeah, but not Article 4 specifically.
All right. We have what does the literature of Washington Irving tell us about life in early America? What was Rip Van Winkle's life before and after he slept his 20-year slumber?
Oh, good question, Sean Thomas. Okay, so here's what I want you to know. Really, from The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, which was the other piece written by, we went through that super quick. We watched I think on Halloween, we watched the video, and that's really kind of all we did. But I did give you that vocabulary. You already know what the vocab is because I've included it in the study guide. It's portal and it's foreboding and a couple of other terms that I pulled out of the Legend of Sleepy Hollow vocabulary. I will tell you, here's what I love about Rip Van Winkle and the reason why I share the story. It's really cool because he falls asleep right before the Revolution, right? The American Revolution. And it's sleepy. It's quiet. It's sort of uneventful. And they're under the rule of the king. He wakes up, and I mean, really the most eventful thing in his life is that he gets harassed by his wife, right? He's what was the word? Henpecked, or what was the word, Mr. Edwards? The way he felt he was treated by his wife.
Petticoat tyranny.
Yeah, petticoat tyranny. Yes. I love that term. So that was really kind of the most eventful thing that happened in the life of Rip Van Winkle. Was he just, he got picked on by his wife for being lazy. And when he wakes up 20 years later, the revolution is over. The United States has become its own country, and he wakes up right around the time. I'm assuming it's like mid to late fall. It's election season. People are in I think it was like a tavern where they're discussing the issues of the day. They're discussing the election. Who are you going to vote for? They ask Rip Van Winkle, who are you going to vote for? And so he falls asleep in the monarchy. And he wakes up in a democratic republic, and that's super exciting because now, for as much as there's like hurt feelings and anger and around the time of an election, and people argue, and Thanksgiving debates over politics and all this stuff. It's actually kind of exciting to be in a country, when you think about it, where we get to make those choices and we get to participate in democracy. We get to participate in our government. And so that's what I really love about this story is Rip Van Winkle wakes up in this exciting country where we get to debate and discuss issues and politics and candidates. And so that's what I love about the story. And so I think that hopefully answers Sean Thomas's question.
All right. Let's see. And I think Sean asked that a couple different times, so we covered that.
Okay.
All right. Let's see. We had a good discussion on the chat about loose versus strict and a good summary from the students. Good job. And we did discuss that a little earlier in this.
Yes.
All right. We addressed the question of last quarter 2 grade or first Q3 grade. It's definitely quarter 2.
It will definitely be yes.
All right. And let's see, literature. Don't worry about the dates on the amendments. We care about that you know what the amendments are and what they mean. The dates, not so much.
When I did dates on the amendments, I was really just showing off. That's all I was doing.
All right. So we addressed the question about Bill of Rights or all amendments. So that's covered a couple different places in the chat by various people. All right. Let's see. All right. We had question number 1 on the study guide, which we just answered, which was Rip Van Winkle. Sorry, running down this.
Yeah, no, I'm trying to scroll through as well. Caitlin was asking about number 1 on the study guide, and I don't know.
That's the Rip Van Winkle question we just answered.
Oh, good. Okay, well then, yeah. Again, for those of you just joining us, if you're joining us late, if you want to ask a question, please don't ask like study guide numbers. If you just like go and throw out the question itself, that'll make life a lot easier for us. Okay, Isak asks, "Is this test hard?" If you don't study, yes, it's hard. If you have studied, it's multiple choice. So I think that part may relieve a little bit of anxiety. Hopefully, it's mostly multiple choice. Almost all of it is multiple choice. So I think the more study and preparation you do this evening, the better. But also get a good night's sleep too. Like, please don't be up until after midnight studying. And I will tell you this too. I usually like to get to my classroom early. I'm usually there by 7. So if you want to just come and hang out in my classroom, it'll be warm. My classroom is always, the heater's always going. So if you just want to, you get to school early, you want to hang out. I believe it's an A2 day tomorrow. So second period students come and hang out. First period students, you want to come and spend some time before school or brunch or lunch. You can come and hang out as well.
All right. We answered the question about specific details from Articles 1, 2, and 3. Main ideas, I think.
Yeah, I see that from Justin. Yeah, so Justin, really, you need to know that Article 1 deals with the legislature. Mr. Edwards, do we have any questions on the powers of Congress from Article 1?
I was about to address that. So I would definitely want to know the powers of the president and the powers of the legislature. All right. So make sure you study particularly Article 1, Section 8. And I believe it was Article 2, Section 2, Article 3, Section 2. Should cover the main ideas of powers. You might also want to review checks and balances. And I think the digital interactive notebook had a good section on that. So I would just review that section for checks and balances or separation of powers. But there are, of course, the videos that we have on MrIppolito.com if you would like some additional resources there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and just to add on, I love Article 1, Section 8. I think that is, Congresswoman Nancy Pelosi. She recently, if you watched the video last week of her with Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer and President Trump, she started out by saying, there is a reason why Congress is created in Article 1 of the Constitution. It's because the Congress is supposed to come first. She was very clear in wanting to say, you know what, if you want, in this case, President Trump wants funding for his border wall that he promised during the campaign. And Nancy Pelosi said, Congress it comes first. We are first when it comes to creating policy, passing laws, and all of those powers. Congress comes first. Article 1, Section 8. So please make sure that you go over that. All of those powers. I'm not going to even go through all of them. That also includes the necessary and proper clause in there as well. Mr. Edwards mentioned Article 2, Section 2, powers of the president, and then Article 3, Section 2. Those are the powers of the Supreme Court. And I would especially focus on, I think, 1 and 2, Congress and the president.
All right. Yeah. And definitely some ways in there about how they check each other. But focus, once again, on Congress. I believe I asked for a little more depth when it comes to Congress. on both powers and checks and balances, because there is more to do with it. So, all right.
Cool. Sean Thomas says, whoa, can we see the email? Sean, remind me in class tomorrow, and I'll show you. If you're talking about the Danny Lee Kylo email, yes, I will show you. Washington Irving, Caitlin already talked about that earlier, so you can always rewind and check that about literature of Washington Irving. We talked about that. Sean also asked that question. Rip Van Winkle, yes. John Kim, can I take the 4-1 quiz on Thursday? Yes, or tomorrow. You can take it either time. Yes. Okay. What else? What else, Mr. Edwards?
We have a question on the Quizlet vocabulary that's not on the study guide. I would still want to know that. Definitely.
Oh, yeah. So on the Quizlet, so I did. Okay, so I did put vocabulary. If you look at the back of the study guide, there's the vocabulary there. But in order to create a Quizlet, Quizlet is all vocabulary based, right? So what I did was on the front of the study guide, I took the stuff that was on there and I kind of had to convert it to what I thought would work for Quizlet. So again, Quizlet should not be the be all end all of your studying. It's just one tool that you can use to help you prepare. So yes, the vocabulary that's on the Quizlet, I pulled from other parts of the study guide, from other stuff that we've learned during the course of the quarter.
All right. Let's see. We have the question, will the 3-3 quiz and Federalist Papers paper going on the grade book for quarter 2? That probably depends on whether you're, I think John is in period 2. So
oh yeah, there's still some there's still some grading that I need to catch up on, John. Yes, so don't worry, I'll take care of my grading.
All right. Someone asked for a link to the study guide, which I provided in the chat, but you can also find it on mrippolito.com under the table of contents.
Yes.
Which is probably your more reliable way to get there. I'm not 100% sure this would work.
Okay, so are we serious, Mr. Edwards? Are we seriously at the end of all of the questions?
We've had quite a few repeats and we've covered them fairly thoroughly. So if people have additional questions, this is probably the time to send them out.
Now would be the time. Okay, so let's see. Going through this exam, what else? Ooh. Okay, so this is going to be a special just for you watching the YouTube video here, just for you in the chat here. Yep. Okay, vocab. Constitutional Convention and Federalist Papers. I don't think I'm giving too much away by just kind of going over like section headings. Constitutional Convention and Federalist Papers. And when I mention this, if new questions start to come to mind, then of course you can, and I see them starting to bubble up now. Yeah, Constitutional Convention, good. And then the next section, Federalist Papers. That's part of the Constitutional Convention. Federalists and Anti-Federalists, that's good. Branches of government. Let's see, just scrolling through. Branches of government. Bill of Rights. Oh, yes. Love it. Washington, Hamilton, and Jefferson. Ooh, the indispensable man, James Flexner. Oh, perhaps I'm giving away too much. The difference between Hamilton and Jefferson, Jefferson's Democratic Republican Party, Alexander Hamilton's Federalist Party. Oh, this is all good stuff. Whiskey Rebellion. Great questions here, Mr. Edwards. Okay, so now it looks like we have some more questions that have just come in. Justin asks, what results from the election should we know about the most?
Which I just answered at the bottom.
Yes, okay, good. Sasha asked, do we need to know the whole Constitution? No, I think we pretty much went over what you do need to know for the Constitution, Articles 1, 2, and 3, the Bill of Rights, and then the amendments that deal with voting rights. Nick, we answered what is the necessary and proper clause. We went into quite a bit of detail, so Nick, just go ahead and rewind, and you can hear all about our answer to the necessary and proper clause. Naomi asks, will the written questions be hard in your opinion? I think they'll be very thought-provoking. And I think, Mr. Edwards, what we're going to do my plan right now, of course, plans are always subject to change, but I think my plan right now, Mr. Edwards, is we're going to ask 2 questions, and
Sounds
I think
good.
we're going to give them the choice to answer either 1 or 2. And if I really get really into it, there might even be like a video, like you watch a short video and then you respond to the video as one of the choices, but I'm not sure. But that's kind of what I have in mind. Mr. Edwards and I will talk about this when we shut down the chat in another 11 minutes. We'll talk about what that written question is going to, or what those written options are going to be. But right now I'm feeling like it's going to be two questions you could choose from, and you'll choose one and you'll respond to that one in like a paragraph. That's kind of what I'm feeling right now. So Naomi, hope that helps to answer your question. What else just came in, Mr. Edwards?
All right. We have, what do we need to know about the federal system?
Federal system. Do you recall any questions on federal system, Mr. Edwards?
There's some information about shared power, which we talked about earlier in this chat.
Okay, let me tell you if I decide to add, because I don't remember seeing a question on federal system, but I like it. Federal system is the same as federalism. It's the same thing. So it's this idea, the federal system is what we have in our country, because the federal government has some things that it does on its own, and the states have some things that they do on their own. And then we have the shared powers. Oh, that looks like I'm doing the Illuminati symbol. That's not what I meant to do. There are the shared powers in the middle of the Venn diagram. Someone's going to take a screenshot of me doing that, and now I'm going to be accused of being linked to the Illuminati, which I'm not. So hopefully that answered your question. All right, what else do we have going on?
All right. Cameron, who's a recent arrival, hello, Cameron, is asking what are the elements of the Constitution. I'm typing a quick summary for you, which I will be posting soon, but we did talk about it, and I would definitely want to rewind and take a look at that. You might also want to take a look through Articles 1, 2, and 3 and see if there's a specific question you would like to ask about those.
Cool. And while you're typing, Mr. Edwards, Ian asks, who's the indispensable man? Well, of course, Ian, it is General and President George Washington. Historian James Flexner called him the indispensable man. The question is, do you think he was the indispensable man? And why would historians consider him the indispensable man? Of course, the word indispensable means you can't live without it. So some people would say that their smartphones today are indispensable. I could not live without my iPhone. Could the country have survived if George Washington had not been around? And I would make a strong argument in favor of George Washington. I think he was, in spite of his faults, his flaws, obviously the biggest one being the fact that he was a slave owner, and we argue how good can we really regard him if he held slaves? Well, he did free his slaves in his will after he died. He was and he helped to create the country that we know today, and set many of the precedents that we have to start the presidency. There was no example to follow prior to George Washington. So he was the one who was setting all of those precedents, all of those examples that presidents still follow today, including when a president takes the oath of office, whatever the name of the president is, do solemnly swear to uphold, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States. So help me God. The so help me God part, the rest of the oath of office is in the Constitution. The so help me God part was added by George Washington when he first took the oath in April of 1789. And every president since then has added it simply because George Washington said it. He was the first to put his hand on a Bible or put his left hand on a Bible and raise his right hand because he thought that was important. And every president since then has sworn, their oath, putting their hand on a Bible and raising their right hand. So he started those traditions. He started the tradition of the cabinet, the creation of his advisors. Nowhere in the Constitution does it say you need to have a Secretary of State and a Secretary of the Treasury and Secretary of War and an Attorney General. It doesn't say that anywhere in the Constitution, nowhere in Article 2. But George Washington was like, hey, I think this is important. And we have had those cabinet positions ever since then. So for those reasons and many more, historians would argue that George Washington is the indispensable man. And I would tend to agree with their assessment that George Washington was pretty indispensable. All right, Mr. Edwards, what's next?
We have a question about the Republican versus Federalist parties, which was a great question. Thank you for asking that, because I actually meant to bring this up. So things I would want to know about the Democratic, Republicans, and Federalists is the following. How do they feel about the size and the role of the national government? How big should it be? How much power should it have? How do they feel about states' rights? How important do they think those are? And finally, should we interpret the Constitution strictly or loosely? These are some of the key points that I would want to know for the exam tomorrow.
All right. Catherine asks, are there going to be midterm election results questions aside from Katie Hill? Yes. I think, Catherine, I think we can safely say, Mr. Edwards, you can corroborate this. I think we can safely say there are no specific questions on proposition results, correct?
Correct.
But you should know the results of the candidate races that we focused on. So I think that's fair to say.
Mm-hmm.
So, okay. Can you give a hint, Naomi asks, of what the written questions will be about? I don't know for sure, but what I do know is this. I love the Bill of Rights. I specifically love the First Amendment. Yeah, so I'm going to say I think First Amendment is going to have something to do with it. Maybe Fourth Amendment. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I think I haven't decided totally what the question is going to be, but I think it's going to be Bill of Rights related. And I think that's where I'll leave it. Is that fair, Mr. Edwards? Anything else that we might consider doing a written response on?
That sounds good, unless we did something about Hamilton and Jefferson.
Oh, yes. So maybe a choice between Hamilton and Jefferson or something on the Bill of Rights. Okay, cool. What? Oh, I just lost my place.
What are, say we have shared powers, which we did talk about before. The Bank of the United States.
Oh, okay. Well, I will tell you this quickly about the Bank of the United States. That was obviously part of Alexander Hamilton's plan. It was one of the 4 pillars as part of his financial plan when he first started out as the Secretary of the Treasury. So here's the idea behind the national bank. The United States needs a place. So the United States is going to collect tax dollars, right? And so we need a place to physically place this money. Where do we place it? We need some sort of institution. We have a choice. We could either take that money and put it into various private banks or state banks. We choose not to do that. Instead, Alexander Hamilton creates a private but publicly controlled, kind of a combination of both, Bank of the United States. Now, the Anti-Federalists, including Thomas Jefferson, are going to argue that the Bank of the United States is strictly designed to help the wealthy, the traders, the merchants, the people from Boston, people from New York, people from Philadelphia, people from the North, because it consolidates power. And see, this is a real smart thing of Alexander Hamilton's. Hamilton conceded, he compromised, and he ended up giving up the nation's capital. You know, it was, for a time, it was in Philadelphia. And then when President Washington was inaugurated, the nation's capital was in New York City. It would later go back to Philadelphia. But Hamilton compromised and said, you know what? All right, I'll allow the national capital to be in the South, which is Washington, D.C. It's in between Virginia and Maryland, surrounded on both sides by slave states, right? And so he's like, okay. But the center of our nation's money, the center of our nation's commerce, has been for the past 200 years New York City. Today, that's where Wall Street is. Today, that's where the most powerful banks and the most powerful financial institutions are. So even though Hamilton lost when it came to the locations of our nation's capital, he won because he was able to centralize the control and the location of our nation's money. And that was the Bank of the United States. So that's kind of the bank in a nutshell. And you just need to know that Hamilton was in favor of it because he thought that that would give our country one strong, solid institution to keep our money, and that anti-federalists like Thomas Jefferson would have been opposed to it because he believed that by putting your money in one national bank, it would, and essentially taking tax dollars from the states and putting it in a national bank, it gave the states less power. So I think that's probably a good summary of the national bank. What else, Mr. Edwards?
Let's see. We have several listed definitions, but there's good answers coming out from other students, so good job. We had a couple questions about, let's see. We have a couple questions about the swearing in oath and some actual questions about, the "So help me God" and putting your hand on the Bible and whether that violates the Establishment Clause, I think.
Oh, well, that's an excellent question. It does not, and I'll tell you why. Because it's a president's personal preference to do that. A president can swear on a dictionary. A president, eventually, I would imagine we're going to have our first Jewish president. I would assume that they would swear on a Torah. Perhaps our first Muslim president would swear on a Quran. You could swear on a history textbook. You could swear on a math book. It doesn't need to be the Bible. That was just the precedent that President George Washington set. You don't have to say the words "So help me God." It was just that George Washington chose that as his personal preference. Real quick word about the First Amendment. I can, for example, as a teacher, if I chose to wear a cross necklace as a personal expression of faith, I could do that. Or if I were Jewish, I could wear a Star of David necklace as a personal expression of my faith. Public officials like teachers or like members, government officials are allowed personal expressions of faith. It is when we use our positions to try to influence, and we use not only our positions, but we use government resources, publicly held resources, to try to influence the religious beliefs of others, that we cross the line. So a cross necklace around my neck would be okay. If we took a moment and I led the class in a prayer to Jesus that everybody does well in the test, then that would be overstepping my bounds. So when a president swears the oath of office and says, "So help me God," or when at the conclusion of the State of the Union address, he says, "God bless the United States of America," he can do that because it's considered a personal expression of faith. Probably won't be on the exam, but a really good question. And so thank you to whoever asked the question. All right, what else, Mr. Edwards? We're at 8:02, but I do want to be able to answer whatever questions came in.
We had a question about the Whiskey Rebellion. I provided a summary in the chat, but if you would like to do just a short version of that.
Oh, I'll do a really short version of that. So Shays' Rebellion during the time of the Articles of Confederation, the national government proved that it was useless, that it could not handle an uprising, a rebellion, an armed group of rebels, farmers with their pitchforks and torches and rifles, basically trying to shut down the functions of the government. Shays' Rebellion proved that the national government was ineffective. The Whiskey Rebellion, on the other hand, so the Shays' Rebellion was in Massachusetts, farmers in Massachusetts. Whiskey Rebellion, farmers in Western Pennsylvania. And when these rebels said, "You know what, we're not going to pay this excise tax, Alexander Hamilton, you and your East Coast elites, we're not going to pay your whiskey tax. We're going to rebel against the whiskey tax." That's when George Washington personally saddled up, got on his horse, led 13,000 federal troops to Western Pennsylvania to say, "No, this is not how, in our new nation, under a new constitution, this is not how we're going to behave. The national government, the government of the United States, is supreme and sovereign, and you will follow the rules of the United States." Well, those rebels, when they found out that George Washington was personally leading an army of 13,000 people to disperse the rebellion, they scattered. They were frightened. They knew that something bad was going to happen, and so it was a nonviolent resolution. It never came to blows, and George Washington pardoned the leaders because they could have been tried for treason. But instead of executing them, he decided, and this is another good precedent to set, he decided, you know what, we'll go ahead and just make sure, as long as it doesn't happen again, then you'll get off the hook this time. So that's basically the Whiskey Rebellion. It's a test of federal authority, of national power. George Washington and the new national government passed the test, and we've had rebellions, we've had riots, we've had uprisings since then, and of course the most serious rebellion in our country is a rebellion we haven't even learned about yet. It's the American Civil War from 1861 to 1865. How will we resolve that much larger conflict, that much larger rebellion? Find out at the end of quarter 3. All right. What else, Mr. Edwards?
Some rights not listed in the Bill of Rights, mostly voting rights, slavery, civil rights as well.
Yep. Okay.
So Naomi had asked, and I missed this one, about giving a description of Hamilton and Jefferson's personalities. It's possible you answered this one while I was focused elsewhere.
Oh, okay. So, well, the personalities of Hamilton and Jefferson, I would say, as they relate to the most important differences, I would say that Hamilton was an elitist. Hamilton believed that the wealthy, the powerful, the educated should run our country. I believe that Hamilton was in favor of rule by a few. You might call that word a plutocracy, which is just kind of a rule by the people who are most qualified. They are landed, they own property, they're wealthy. Those are the people who should be running the country because they are the most invested, financially invested in the country. That's why, that attitude is the reason why at first in most states, maybe even all states when the country first began, you had to be a property owner in order to vote. If you were a renter, if you did not own land or a home, any kind of property, in most states, perhaps all, you did not have the right to vote. It is only in the 1820s and 1830s that we have this idea of what's called universal manhood suffrage. We'll learn about this in quarter 3, where we say, you know what, maybe every man over the age of 21, every white male over the age of 21, whether you own property or not, you should be able to vote. But that was not the attitude at the time. So that would have been Hamilton's attitude, that really this country belongs to the elite, to the wealthy, to the educated. Thomas Jefferson, on the other hand, was a man of the people. So Thomas Jefferson was influenced by the Enlightenment. He was influenced by Rousseau and by John Locke and by Montesquieu. He was an idealist. He believed that our government should be a government of the people and for the people, kind of a little bit of a preview of Lincoln's Gettysburg Address. And so Jefferson, even though he was born into wealth, whereas Hamilton was born into poverty, Hamilton ends up being the one who wants the country to be run by the wealthy. Jefferson, born into elite status, the son of a wealthy Virginia planter, and he himself a wealthy Virginia planter. Jefferson was very much the liberal. He was very much the idealist. He believed that in the goodness of all people, and so he wanted more people to participate. He wanted more democracy. He wanted more power to just the regular, ordinary citizens, which would then be logical that he would be more in favor of states' rights rather than a strong national government. Thomas Jefferson believed that power should be dispersed and power should be decentralized, whereas Alexander Hamilton believed that power should be concentrated among the wealthy, the elite, the powerful, and Jefferson wants to spread out that power. I think that's a good summary of the differences in personality and outlook between Hamilton and Jefferson.
All right.
Okay. What do we miss?
We've covered most of it. A lot of it's just fast review. Siena, shared power is discussed in more detail earlier on. So just take the chance to rewind through, and we should have that. I answered a couple of these questions in the chat as well.
Okay.
So, and
Good.
Jefferson's political party would be the Democratic Republicans or just Republican.
Yes. Yeah. And so don't be fooled. Sometimes you'll see it referred to as the Jeffersonian Republicans, sometimes the Democratic Republicans, and sometimes just the straight up Republicans. And of course, using that term Republicans can be confusing for students because it is not like the Republican Party today and is actually disconnected because the modern Republican Party was formed in the 1850s, and we'll learn about that in third quarter. But the Jeffersonian Republican Party, that will morph into and kind of become the modern Democratic Party during the age of Andrew Jackson, which again we'll learn about in quarter 3. Okay, Mr. Edwards, did we cover everything?
Pretty much. I'm just answering the kind of geographic question about the parties. So yeah, Jefferson and Hamilton similar to North and South in some ways, but a lot of it's based on population and trade.
And I see Yabsar's question right there. So Yabsar, to answer your question specifically, if we're going to do a North and South, and it's not totally North and South, but I would say that Hamilton represents the interests of the cities of the North, right? Because he would be all about trade. He would be all about commerce, banking, and those powers, those industries are shipping. Trade is the same as shipping, shipbuilding. Those would be concentrated in places like Boston, places like Philadelphia, New York City. That would be where Hamilton's and the Federalists' main source of support would be. However, I should also point out that there were a couple of shipping commerce centers in the South. I would say that probably most notably might be Charleston, South Carolina. So you might find a few Federalists kind of in there. You might also find a few Federalists, I don't know, along the Chesapeake, where there was commerce and trade and shipping within like Maryland and Virginia, kind of there. I would say for the most part, though, in the South is going to predominantly reflect the politics and the views of Thomas Jefferson and the Democratic Republicans, because they would be more about states' rights. They would be more about decentralized government. And so if we're going to say in broad terms which regions supported, I would say in general, the North would support the Federalists. In general, the South would support the Democratic Republicans. However, Philadelphia, they're going to support the Federalists. They're a big city. But over in Western Pennsylvania, they're probably going to be much more Democratic Republican, want states' rights, want decentralized government. So I would say farmland would support the Democratic Republicans, whereas the cities are going to support the Federalists. So I think hopefully that answers your question. All right. Well, Mr. Edwards, I think, and you've supplemented that with some good responses in the chat as well. All right. Well, Mr. Edwards, hey, it is 8:12. And so I think if you feel good about wrapping this up, Mr. Edwards, I think I feel good about wrapping this up as well. What do you think?
I think so.
Good deal.
Good job, everyone.
Yes. Well, thank you. I know, really good questions. And so I think we're now going to formally call it. It's 8:12 p.m. We've gone 12 minutes past our hour, which is fine because you asked really, really good questions. I want to say thank you to everybody who watched live and participated. I know that I'll miss somebody, but just give a shout out to everybody who was on live asking really, really good questions. If you couldn't watch live, of course, you can watch this in its entirety. We're going to wrap this up. And even if you did watch live, you can, once it's all done and processed, which should just be in a few minutes, then you can go back and watch from the beginning. You could have this playing all night long on your headphones or your earbuds, so you can listen to the sounds of Mr. Edwards and Mr. Ippolito's voices all night long to help you prepare for your exam. But hopefully this was helpful to you, and thank you so much for participating. Mr. Edwards, thank you very much for joining us live as well.
No problem. Thank you for inviting me.
All right. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to go ahead. I'm going to click stop broadcast, but Mr. Edwards and I we're going to stay on the line. So don't go anywhere, Mr. Edwards. And we're going to talk about your written question or questions. And so once again, thanks again. Have a great evening. Don't stay up too late studying. You want to make sure to get some sleep tonight. And we'll see you tomorrow for the Q2 8th grade history exam. Thanks so much. Have a good night. And thanks for joining us. Bye-bye.